Hello.
And welcome to Larry's Library.
Hello, welcome to Larry's Library. Hello, welcome to Larry's Library. We're continuing to read Pinocchio. Are you okay there, Paul?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, Pinocchio promised the blue-haired fairy who said she would now be his mama that he would go to school. And so now, in chapter 26, Pinocchio accompanies his schoolfellows to the seashore to see the terrible Dogfish. The following day, Pinocchio went to the government school. Imagine the delight of all the little rogues when they saw a puppet walk into their school. They set up a roar of laughter that never ended. They played him all sorts of tricks. One boy carried off his cap. Another pulled his jacket behind. One tried to give him a pair of inky mustaches just under his nose. And another attempted to tie strings to his feet and hands to make him dance. For a short time, Pinocchio pretended not to care and got on as well as he could. But at last, losing all patience, he turned to those who were teasing him most and making game of him, and he said to them, looking very angry, "Beware, boys! I am not come here to be your buffoon. I respect others, and I intend to be respected." "Well said, boaster! You have spoken like a book!" howled the young rascals, convulsed with mad laughter, and one of them, more impertinent than the others, stretched out his hand, intending to seize the puppet by the end of his nose. But he was not in time, for Pinocchio stuck his leg out from under the table and gave him a great kick on his shins. "Oh, what hard feet!" roared the boy, rubbing the bruise that the puppet had given him. "And what elbows, even harder than his feet!" said another, who for his rude tricks had received a blow in the stomach. But nevertheless, the kick and the blow acquired at once for Pinocchio the sympathy and the esteem of all the boys in the school. They all made friends with him and liked him heartily. And even the master praised him, for he found him attentive, studious, and intelligent, always the first to come to school and the last to leave when school was over. But he had one fault. He made too many friends, and amongst them were several young rascals well known for their dislike to study and love of mischief. The master warned him every day, and even the good fairy never failed to tell him and to repeat constantly, "Take care, Pinocchio. Those bad schoolfellows of yours will end sooner or later by making you lose all love of study, and perhaps even they may bring upon you some great misfortune." "There is no fear of that," answered the puppet, shrugging his shoulders and touching his forehead as much as to say, "There is so much sense here." Now it happened that one fine day, as he was on his way to school, he met several of his usual companions who, coming up to him, asked, "Have you heard the great news?" "No." "In the sea near here a dogfish has appeared, as big as a mountain." "Not really. Can it be the same dogfish that was there when my poor papa was drowned?" "We are going to shore to see him. Will you come with us?" "No, I am going to school." "What matters school? We can go to school tomorrow. Whether we have a lesson more or less, a lesson more or a lesson less, we shall always remain the same donkeys." "But what will the master say?" "The master may say what he likes. He is paid on purpose to grumble all day." "And my mamma?" Mammas know nothing," answered those bad little boys. "Do you know what I will do?" said Pinocchio. "I have reasons for wishing to see the dogfish, but I will go and see him when school is over." "Poor donkey!" exclaimed one of the number. "Do you suppose that a fish of that size will wait for your convenience? As soon as he is tired of being here, he will start for another place, and then it will be too late." "How long does it take to get from here to the shore?" asked the puppet. "We can be there and back in an hour." "Then away!" shouted Pinocchio, "and he who runs fastest is the best." Having thus given the signal to start, the boys, with their books and copybooks under their arms, rushed off across the fields, and Pinocchio was always the first. He seemed to have wings to his feet. From time to time he turned to jeer at his companions, who were some distance behind, and seeing them panting for breath, covered with dust and their tongues hanging out of their mouths, he laughed heartily. The unfortunate boy little knew what terrors and horrible disasters he was going to meet with. Chapter 27. There is a great fight between Pinocchio and his companions. One of them is wounded, and Pinocchio is arrested by the gendarme. When he arrived on the shore, Pinocchio looked out to sea, but he saw no dogfish. The sea was as smooth as a great crystal mirror. "Where is the dogfish?" he asked, turning to his companions. "He must have gone to have his breakfast," said one of them, laughing. "Or he has thrown himself onto his bed to have a little nap," added another, laughing still louder. From their absurd answers and silly laughter, Pinocchio perceived that his companions had been making a fool of him and inducing him to believe a tale with no truth in it. Taking it very badly, he said to them angrily, "And now may I ask what fun you could find in deceiving me with the story of the dogfish?" "Oh, it was great fun," answered the little rascals in chorus. "And in what did it consist?" "In making you miss school and persuading you to come with us. Are you not ashamed of being always so punctual and so diligent with your lessons? Are you not ashamed of studying so hard?" "And if I study hard, what concern is it of yours?" "It concerns us excessively, because it makes us appear in a bad light to the master." "Why?" "Because boys who study make those who, like us, have no wish to learn, seem worse by comparison. And that is too bad. We, too, have our pride." "Then what must I do to please you?" "You must follow our example and hate school, lessons, and the master, our three greatest enemies." "And if I wish to continue my studies?" "In that case, we will have nothing more to do with you, and at the first opportunity we will make you pay for it." "Really," said the puppet, shaking his head, "you make me inclined to laugh." "Eh, Pinocchio!" shouted the biggest of the boys, confronting him. "None of your superior airs. Don't come here to crow over us. For if you are not afraid of us, we are not afraid of you. Remember that you are 1 against 7 of us." "7? Like the 7 deadly sins," said Pinocchio with a shout of laughter. "Listen to him. He has insulted us all. He called us the 7 deadly sins." "Pinocchio, beg pardon, or it will be the worse for you." "Cuckoo!" sang the puppet, putting his forefinger to the end of his nose scoffingly. "Pinocchio, it will end badly." "Cuckoo!" "You will get as many blows as a donkey." "Cuckoo!" "You will return home with a broken nose." "Cuckoo!" "Oh, you shall have the cuckoo from me," said the most courageous of the boys. "Take that to begin with, and keep it for your supper tonight." And so saying, he gave him a blow on the head with his fist. But it was give and take, for the puppet, as was to be expected, immediately returned the blow, and the fight in a moment became general and desperate. Pinocchio, although he was one alone, defended himself like a hero. He used his feet, which were of the hardest wood, to such purpose that he kept his enemies at a respectful distance. Wherever they touched, they left a bruise by way of reminder. The boys, becoming furious at not being able to measure themselves hand to hand with a puppet, had recourse to other weapons. Loosening their satchels, they commenced throwing their school books at him. Am I missing something? Grammars, dictionaries, spelling books, geography books, and other scholastic works. But Pinocchio was quick and had sharp eyes, and always managed to duck in time, so that the books passed over his head and fell all into the sea. Imagine the astonishment of the fish. Thinking that the books were something to eat, they all arrived in shoals, but having tasted a page or two, or a frontispiece, they spat it quickly out and made a wry face that seemed to say, "It isn't food for us. We are accustomed to something much better." The battle, meantime, had become fiercer than ever, when a big crab, who had come out of the water and had climbed slowly up onto the shore, called out in a hoarse voice that sounded like a trumpet with a bad cold, "Have done with that, you young ruffians, for you are nothing else. These hand-to-hand fights between boys seldom finish well. Some disaster is sure to happen. Poor Crab. He might as well have preached to the wind. Even that young rascal Pinocchio, turning round, looked at him mockingly and said rudely, "Hold your tongue, you tiresome crab. You had better suck some licorice lozenges to cure that cold in your throat, or better still go to bed and try to get a reaction." Just then the boys, who had no more books of their own to throw, espied at a little distance the satchel that belonged to Pinocchio, and took possession of it in less time than it takes to tell. Amongst the books there was one bound in strong cardboard with the back and points of parchment. It was a treatise on arithmetic. I leave you to imagine if it was big or not. One of the boys seized the volume and, aiming at Pinocchio's head, threw it at him with all the force he could muster. But instead of hitting the puppet, it struck one of his companions on the temple, who, turning white as a sheet, said only, "Oh, mother, help! I am dying!" and fell his whole length on the sand. Thinking he was dead, the terrified boys ran off as hard as their legs could carry them, and in a few minutes they were out of sight. But Pinocchio remained. Although from grief and fright he was more dead than alive, nevertheless he ran and soaked his handkerchief in the sea and began to bathe the temples of his poor schoolfellow. Crying bitterly in his despair, he kept calling him by name and saying to him, "Eugene, my poor Eugene, open your eyes and look at me. Why do you not answer? I did not do it. Indeed, it was not I that hurt you so. And believe me, it was not. Open your eyes, Eugene. If you keep your eyes shut, I shall die too. Oh, what shall I do? How shall I ever return home? How can I ever have the courage to go back to my good mamma? What will become of me? Where can I fly to? Oh, how much better it would have been, 1,000 times better, if only I had gone to school. Why did I listen to my companions? They have been my ruin. The master said to me, and my mamma repeated it often, 'Beware of bad companions.' But I am obstinate, a wilful fool. I let them talk, and then I always take my own way, and I have to suffer for it. And so, ever since I have been in the world, I have never had a happy quarter of an hour. Oh dear, what will become of me? What will become of me? What will become of me?" And Pinocchio began to cry and sob and to strike his head with his fist and to call poor Eugene by his name. Suddenly he heard the sound of approaching footsteps. He turned and saw 2 carabineers. "What are you doing there, lying on the ground?" they asked Pinocchio. "I am helping my schoolfellow." "Has he been hurt?" "So it seems." "Hurt indeed," said one of the carabineers, stooping down and examining Eugene closely. "This boy has been wounded in the temple. Who wounded him?" Not I," stammered the puppet breathlessly. "If it was not you, who then did it?" "Not I," repeated Pinocchio. "And with what was he wounded?" "With this book." And the puppet picked up from the ground the treatise on arithmetic, bound in cardboard and parchment, and showed it to the carabineer. "And to whom does this book belong?" "To me." "That is enough. Nothing more is wanted. Get up and come with us at once." "But I—" "Come along with us." "But I am innocent." "Come along with us." Before they left, the carabineers called some fishermen who were passing at that moment near the shore in their boat, and said to them, "We give this boy who has been wounded in the head into your charge. Carry him to your house and nurse him. Tomorrow we will come and see him." They then turned to Pinocchio, and having placed him between them, they said to him in a commanding voice, "Forward, and walk quickly, or it will be the worse for you." Without requiring it to be repeated, the puppet set out along the road leading to the village. But the poor little devil hardly knew where he was. He thought he must be dreaming, and what a dreadful dream! He was beside himself. He saw double, his legs shook, his tongue clung to the roof of his mouth, and he could not utter a word. And yet, in the midst of his stupefaction and apathy, his heart was pierced by a cruel thorn. The thought that he would have to pass under the windows of the good fairy's house between the carabineers. He would rather have died. They had already reached the village when a gust of wind blew Pinocchio's cap off his head and carried it 10 yards off. Will you permit me, said the puppet to the carabineers, to go and get my cap? Go then, but be quick about it. The puppet went and picked up his cap, but instead of putting it on his head, he took it between his teeth and began to run as hard as he could towards the seashore. The carabineers, thinking it would be difficult to overtake him, sent after him a large mastiff who had won the first prizes at all the dog races. Pinocchio ran, but the dog ran faster. The people came to their windows and crowded into the street in their anxiety to see the end of the desperate race. But they could not satisfy their curiosity, for Pinocchio and the dog raised such clouds of dust that in a few minutes nothing could be seen of either of them. Ooh. And that's the end of that chapter. The next chapter is Pinocchio is in danger of being fried in a frying pan like a fish. Cool. Imagine how that would happen.
Cool. I hope he doesn't spun off his feet again, and that's a dogfish.
No, that's a dog in the water. I don't think that's a dogfish. I don't think that's a dogfish. I think that's just a dog in the water.
Come on.
Oh, man. Well, you just have to wait. We don't have much more. We've only got about a quarter inch of the book to go.
It's a mustache
Thank
dog.
you. Please leave a comment. Let me know what you think.
And I had a noodle bee on it.
Have a good day. This has been Larry's Library.
It was amazing.